For 6 months, they thought I was nothing more than a helpless man waiting to die. My own brother and wife were ready to steal my empire while I lay silent inside a Miami Beach villa. But they made one deadly mistake. They believed I would never stand again. What happened in that courtroom changed everything forever. For 6 long months, I lay trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed me. The luxurious beach villa in Miami, once a symbol of my success, had turned into a silent prison. Every morning, the sound of the Florida waves crashing against the shore reached my room like a cruel reminder that the world outside was still moving while I remained frozen in place. Sunlight poured through the massive glass windows, warming the marble floors and expensive furniture. But none of it mattered anymore. Wealth means nothing when you cannot even lift your own hand. The doctors called it a miracle that I survived the accident. I called it a curse. They spoke about me as if I were already gone, whispering outside my room about permanent paralysis and irreversible damage. Some believed I could no longer understand what people were saying around me. Others thought my mind had completely faded away, but they were wrong. My body had betrayed me, not my consciousness. I heard every word clearly. I remembered every face standing around, my bed pretending to care while secretly waiting for the day I would finally stop breathing. At night, the villa became unbearably quiet. The distant sound of the ocean mixed with the cold air from the vents, creating an emptiness that slowly consumed me from the inside. I would stare at the ceiling for hours, unable to move, unable to scream, feeling like a prisoner buried alive inside his own skin. Fear became my closest companion. Not fear of death, but fear of becoming powerless forever. A man who once controlled billion-dollar businesses could no longer even sit up without help. Sometimes Linda would walk into the room, wearing expensive perfume and perfectly styled clothes, carrying herself like a grieving wife in front of others. But the moment she thought nobody was watching, her expression changed completely. There was no love left in her eyes, only impatience. She would stand near the window, speaking quietly on the phone, discussing business meetings and company decisions, as if I no longer existed. I could hear the frustration in her voice every time the doctors mentioned that my heart was still strong enough to survive. Then there was Stephen, my younger brother, the boy I protected my entire life. I gave him opportunities, trusted him with my companies, defended him when others doubted him, and now he walked through my house like he already owned everything. Sometimes he sat beside my bed, pretending to speak to me with concern, but the second he believed I could not hear him, his tone changed. He talked about my hotel chain, my real estate empire, my investments, dividing my entire life into numbers and contracts. To him, I was no longer a brother. I was an obstacle standing between him and power. The worst pain was not physical. It was listening to betrayal while being unable to respond. I wanted to grab him by the collar and remind him who built the empire he was trying to steal. I wanted to scream at Linda for destroying the vows she once swore to honor. But my body remained still, trapped in silence, while anger burned inside me stronger every single day. Stephen had always lived in my shadow. Ever since we were children, people compared him to me, and no matter how hard he tried, he could never escape it. I was the older brother who built businesses, closed million-dollar deals, and carried the Black family name to heights nobody thought possible. Stephen was the younger brother who followed behind me, benefiting from the doors I opened for him. I gave him everything he had: money, power, respect, and a position inside my company that he could never have earned on his own. I believed blood meant loyalty. I was wrong. The moment I became weak, Stephen changed. At first it was subtle. He started attending meetings without informing me. He began making decisions about the hotel chain while telling everyone he was only helping during my recovery. Employees who once answered directly to me slowly started reporting to him instead. My signature disappeared from contracts, replaced by his. Every move was calculated, careful enough to look innocent to outsiders, but I could see exactly what he was doing. He wasn't protecting my empire. He was taking it piece by piece while I lay trapped inside that bed. One evening, I heard him enter my room while speaking on the phone. His voice carried confidence I had never heard before. He stood near the balcony overlooking the ocean and laughed quietly as he discussed one of my Miami hotels. He told someone the ownership transfer would happen soon and that Christian won't be a problem much longer. Hearing those words felt colder than death itself. My own brother was not praying for my recovery. He was waiting for my funeral. Linda became his perfect partner in Betrayal. Together, they moved around the villa like two people already celebrating victory. Sometimes they thought I was asleep and openly discussed how they would sell certain properties after gaining full legal control. They spoke about my businesses like scavengers dividing a dead man's belongings. Linda even joked once that she had wasted enough years pretending to be the supportive wife of a work-obsessed millionaire. Stephen laughed with her, and that sound echoed in my mind for days. I began noticing how fearless they had become. Stephen sat in my office chair during company video calls, giving orders with confidence, as if he had already replaced me. He started wearing custom suits and expensive watches, trying to imitate the image I had spent years building. But no matter how hard he tried, he could never hide the greed behind his eyes. Power was intoxicating him. Every day, he became more arrogant, more careless. One night, he walked into my room, holding a glass of whiskey, and stared at me with a smirk on his face. "You know what your problem was, Christian," he said quietly. "You always believed loyalty could be bought with kindness." He leaned closer to my bed, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "The empire belongs to the strongest person in the room now." I wanted to destroy him in that moment. Rage exploded inside me so violently that my fingers twitched for the first time in weeks. Stephen noticed the movement and froze. For a brief second, fear flashed across his face. But then he convinced himself it was nothing and walked away. What he didn't realize was that my body was slowly waking up, and so was the man he thought he had already buried. Every night after the villa finally fell silent, my real battle began. The luxurious halls that once hosted celebrities, investors, and powerful businessmen now felt like the corridors of a prison. During the day, I remained motionless in bed, while nurses moved around me and Stephen pretended to take control of my empire. But after midnight, when the lights dimmed and the sound of the ocean became the only thing breaking the silence, Anthony quietly locked the bedroom door and helped me begin the painful process of reclaiming my body. Anthony had worked for me for nearly 15 years. He was more than a nurse. He was one of the few people who still saw me instead of a dying billionaire. while everyone else had given up on me. He believed I could fight my way back. Every night he would help me sit up, even when my muscles screamed in agony. Sweat poured down my face from the effort of doing the simplest movements. Sometimes my arms trembled so badly I could barely hold myself upright for a few seconds. Other nights, the pain became so unbearable that darkness crept into my vision, and I nearly passed out. But Anthony never allowed me to quit. He pushed me harder every single night, reminding me who I used to be before the accident destroyed my life. He spoke to me like I was still the powerful man who built an empire from nothing. And slowly, something inside me began to change. The hopelessness that had consumed me for months turned into determination. The first time I managed to stand on my own lasted less than 3 seconds. My legs shook violently beneath me before I collapsed back into the chair. The pain shot through my spine like electricity, but for the first time since the accident, I felt alive again. Anthony smiled and told me that 3 seconds was enough to start a war. From that night forward, I became obsessed with recovery. Every movement became a mission. Every drop of sweat felt like revenge against the people waiting for my death. While Stephen slept peacefully in the guest wing of the villa, believing he had already won, I forced myself to take step after step across the room. Some nights I crashed onto the floor so hard I thought bones had broken again. Other nights I stared at my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the weak and exhausted man looking back at me. But even then, one thought kept me going: they will not destroy me. Weeks passed, and my strength slowly returned. I could move my hands without trembling. My voice, once trapped in silence, became stronger with every whispered sentence. Anthony and I kept everything secret. The doctors were never told about the progress. The security staff remained unaware. To the outside world, Christian Black was still a helpless man slowly fading away inside a hospital bed. Meanwhile, Stephen grew more confident every day. I overheard him planning legal meetings, discussing ownership transfers, and preparing documents that would give him complete control over my companies. Linda stood beside him through all of it, acting like the future queen of an empire built on betrayal. Listening to them no longer filled me with helpless anger. It fueled me. Their greed became the reason I refused to give up. By the end of the 5th month, I no longer needed Anthony to hold me while I walked. My body still carried pain, but my confidence had returned. One night, I stood alone in front of the giant bedroom mirror wearing one of my old suits. The man staring back at me was no longer broken. He looked dangerous again, and for the first time since the accident, I smiled because I knew something they didn't. The day of my return was getting closer. The morning of the court hearing arrived with heavy, gray clouds hanging over Miami. The ocean outside the villa looked darker than usual, as if the city itself could feel that something was about to change. Anthony helped me adjust the cuffs of my black Italian suit while I stood in front of the mirror. For months, I had imagined this moment over and over again. The day everyone who betrayed me would finally see that I was not dead, not broken, and not willing to surrender my empire without a fight. Every movement still carried pain, but I refused to let it show. My body had become leaner after months of recovery, and the scars left by the accident remained hidden beneath my clothes like reminders of the war I survived. As I stared at my reflection, anger and determination mixed together inside me. Stephen believed today would be the final step in stealing everything I built. He had no idea that his perfect victory was about to collapse in front of an entire courtroom. The Miami-Dade County Court was crowded by the time we arrived. Lawyers moved through the hallways, carrying stacks of documents, while reporters gathered outside, eager to witness the legal transfer of a billionaire's empire. Stephen had made sure the story spread through business circles. He wanted everyone to see him become the new face of black enterprises. Anthony parked the car across the street, while I remained hidden from view. From a distance, I watched Stephen and Linda walk toward the courthouse entrance together. Stephen wore a tailored black suit and expensive sunglasses, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who already believed he owned the world. Linda walked beside him, dressed in dark designer clothing, her face covered with fake sadness for the cameras. Anyone looking at them would have believed they were grieving family members struggling through a tragedy. I saw the truth beneath the performance. Greed, ambition, betrayal. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt cold and tense. Judge Garrison sat silently behind the bench, reviewing legal documents, while attorneys whispered to one another. Stephen stood near the front with complete confidence, occasionally shaking hands with people, as if he were already celebrating. Linda sat beside him, pretending to wipe tears from her eyes. Then Stephen began speaking. His voice carried through the courtroom with rehearsed sadness as he described my condition. He called me mentally and physically incapable of managing my companies. He claimed the businesses were suffering because of my permanent condition, and insisted that giving him full control was the only responsible solution. Every lie that left his mouth tightened, the anger burning inside my chest. Finally, the judge reached for his pen. The courtroom fell completely silent. Reporters leaned forward in anticipation, while Stephen straightened his posture, ready for the moment that would officially hand him my empire. And then the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. The sound echoed like thunder. Every head turned instantly. Conversation stopped. Even the judge froze. I stepped inside slowly, my polished shoes striking the marble floor with sharp echoes that filled the silent room. No wheelchair followed behind me. No cane supported my steps. I walked entirely on my own. The reaction was immediate. One woman near the back gasped loudly. Lawyers stared at me in disbelief. Linda's face lost all color, and the papers in her hand slipped to the floor. Stephen looked completely frozen, his confident expression collapsing into pure shock. He looked as though he had seen someone return from the grave. I kept walking toward the front of the courtroom, without taking my eyes off him. Every step felt heavier with purpose. Every second stretched the fear growing across his face. And when I finally stopped in front of the judge, the silence in that courtroom became louder than any scream. I stood in the center of that silent courtroom and looked directly into Stephen's terrified eyes. For months, he had waited for this day, believing it would mark the end of Christian Black. Instead, it became the beginning of his downfall. The confidence that once filled his face had completely disappeared. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at me, unable to understand how the man he had already buried in his mind was now standing right in front of him. Judge Garrison slowly lowered his pen onto the desk and removed his glasses, still trying to process what he was seeing. The courtroom remained frozen in disbelief. Reporters whispered to each other, while lawyers exchanged stunned expressions. Nobody expected a dead empire to walk back into the room. I took a deep breath and finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady, and powerful enough to cut through the silence like a blade. I believe this hearing is over. The words hit Stephen harder than any punch ever could. He quickly tried to recover, forcing himself to step forward. "Christian," he said nervously, pretending to sound emotional. "You shouldn't be here. You're still recovering." I almost laughed at the performance. Just hours earlier, he had been ready to steal everything I owned, while declaring me mentally incapable of surviving without him. Now, he suddenly wanted to sound like a caring brother again. "I've recovered enough to know exactly what you've been doing behind my back," I replied while staring directly at him. "And today, everyone in this courtroom is going to hear the truth." Stephen's lawyer immediately stood up and attempted to object, but Judge Garrison silenced him with a raised hand. For the first time since the hearing began, the judge's attention was completely focused on me. I reached into my coat and placed several documents onto the bench. Anthony had spent weeks helping me gather evidence quietly, while Stephen believed I remained helpless in bed. Bank transfers, forged medical reports, secret ownership agreements. Every piece of betrayal was now sitting in front of the court. As the judge reviewed the documents, the atmosphere inside the courtroom completely changed. Stephen's face turned pale, while Linda avoided looking at me entirely. The same people who once walked into that court with confidence were now drowning in fear. Then came the moment I had waited months for. Judge Garrison looked toward Stephen with visible disappointment and asked him if he wished to explain the fraudulent medical evaluations submitted to the court. Stephen opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, money and manipulation could not save him. Linda suddenly stood up, trying to separate herself from the situation. She claimed she knew nothing about the forged documents and insisted Stephen handled everything alone. Her voice shook with panic, but nobody believed her anymore. The courtroom had already seen the truth, hiding behind their fake tears and rehearsed sympathy. I turned toward both of them and felt something unexpected inside me. Not anger, not hatred, just clarity. These were people who traded loyalty for greed and love for power. They destroyed themselves long before I ever walked back into that courtroom. When the hearing finally ended, reporters flooded outside the courthouse, trying to capture every moment of the story. Cameras flashed in every direction as my return spread across Miami like wildfire. The billionaire, who was believed to be a living corpse, had returned to reclaim his empire. As I walked down the courthouse steps with Anthony beside me, the warm Miami sunlight hit my face for the first time in months. The city looked different now, sharper, clear, alive again. I realized then that surviving betrayal changes a person forever. Some people break after losing everything. Others come back stronger than anyone imagined. And as I looked back at the courthouse, one final time, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Christian Black was no longer the man they tried to destroy. He had become someone far more dangerous. And if this story kept you hooked till the very end, make sure to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another powerful emotional story filled with betrayal, revenge, and unforgettable comebacks. Your support truly means everything, and the next story might be even more shocking than this one.